Hello, I'm Robin. Welcome to Bookspin. In this video, I'd like to take a glimpse into the world of Soviet science fiction and provide a few reading recommendations. Now, I've read a few Soviet SF novels recently, not a huge amount, but those books that I have read have been remarkable. And the Soviet science fiction that I've read has all been very thought-provoking, with some very interesting speculative ideas and layers of philosophical depth and political allegory. So I think there's enough here to create quite an interesting list. So I've put this list together with 5 translated Soviet science fiction novels that I can highly recommend, plus 1 anthology of short stories for good measure. Let's take a look at the novels first and go through these in chronological order of the time that they were written. Starting off with We by Yevgeny Zamyatin. This is one of the first great 20th century dystopian novels and an important influence on later works such as 1984. This edition here, it even says the most influential science fiction novel of the 20th century. Zamyatin wrote this in 1920 to 1921, but its first publication was actually as an English translation in 1924. This was the first of many English translations along with other languages, but clearly this book was way too controversial for the Soviet authorities because it didn't get its publication in Russia until 1988. This novel is set in a future totalitarian society that has taken over the world, known as the One State, in which life is strictly regulated, individuality is repressed, and personal privacy is virtually non-existent. In fact, entire cities are built out of glass, where people live out their lives in a kind of transparent nightmare of total surveillance. And it's within this society that we follow a protagonist who is a spacecraft engineer, and he is named D503. And we follow him through his journal entries, right? He is a man who is thoroughly brainwashed into the ideology of this regime. But then he manages to get involved with an unusual woman called I-330 who subverts social norms. And he's both attracted to her and repulsed by her. And this is where things start to get really interesting and the story kicks off. Now, the world that Zamyatin constructs in this novel is vivid. I think it's very believable, and of course it's very chilling. It brilliantly foreshadows some of the horrors of Stalinism. It's no wonder that this book was suppressed in Zamyatin's own country for most of the 20th century. It remains an enduring dystopian vision and a tense political drama to read to this day. Next up, I'd like to talk about The Heart of a Dog by Mikhail Bulgakov. Bulgakov is best known for his masterpiece, The Master and Margarita. But this novella is another remarkable gem of his, which leans more into science fiction territory. It was written in 1925, but like the last book, it was a very long time until it was officially published in the Soviet Union in 1987. This is a magnificently absurd and humorous mad scientist tale and a biting satire of the communist revolution. In this story, we have Professor Preobrazhensky, who is a brilliant surgeon. He adopts a stray dog off the streets of Moscow and attempts to transform and uplift this animal into an intelligent being through radical organ transplantation. And ultimately, this dog, who's called Sharik, takes on a kind of human form. And despite this remarkable breakthrough, ultimately the professor is not at all happy with his creation. And in this respect, he's just like Victor Frankenstein. While Sharik has taken on humanoid form and human-like intelligence, he appears unkempt and primitive and retains the crude instincts and behavior of a dog. The story that follows is both tragic and comic, as Sharik's case vividly allegorizes the dehumanizing effects of totalitarianism and the communist attempts to engineer the new Soviet man. So again, it's no wonder that this book never got published during the author's lifetime. Next up, I'd like to talk about Professor Dowell's Head by Alexander Belyaev. This is a classic of sci-fi horror. It was first serialized in short form in a Moscow newspaper in 1925. So again, we're sticking to the 1920s here, but unlike the first two books in this list, this story never had a problem getting published. It was later expanded upon and made into a full-length novel, which was published in 1938. And this book here is quite a recent translation of the novel version. This story is one of the most popular and influential works within early Soviet SF, with Belyaev sometimes being described as Russia's answer to Wells or Verne. It wasn't until 1980, though, until this story got its first English translation. Now, the antagonist in this story is a man called Professor Kern, and he is a high-flying doctor in 1920s Paris. He is amoral, ruthless, and vain. He's a man who puts personal glory ahead of the interests of his patients. So I think he's the ultimate symbol of corruption within the medical establishment. Within his private clinic, he carries out experiments, reviving disembodied human heads and keeping them alive, including that of his former boss, Professor Dowell. He keeps him alive in this bodiless, helpless state and exploits him to extract scientific secrets to further his work. As the professor goes to increasingly shocking lengths to further his research and achieve scientific glory, the narrative that follows is fast-paced and full of intrigue. I think this novel is a thrilling ride and a highly entertaining read. So let's move on to a work from a later period in Soviet history. This is Self-Discovery by Vladimir Savchenko. Savchenko was an award-winning Soviet-Ukrainian science fiction writer with quite an interesting catalogue of work. Unfortunately, not a lot of it is available in English. This is his 1967 novel, which was translated in 1979 as part of Macmillan's Best of Soviet Science Fiction series. In this story, we follow an engineer and a computer scientist, Krivoshein, who is working on creating a radical new information processing system that he calls the computer womb. But things take an unexpected turn when he tries uploading his own mind into the computer and inadvertently discovers that this machine is actually capable of duplicating the human body. Thus, he creates a clone of himself. And he kind of fears what might happen if others might discover his invention. And in his attempts to escape the reaches of the authorities and the scientific establishment, he ends up making multiple clones of himself using this machine, and these doubles have to work together, but the dynamic is kind of interesting because they are also rivals that they have to contend with. So if that premise sounds a little bit ridiculous, a little bit comedic, it's true. There are some farcical and humorous elements to this novel. But I wouldn't describe this as simply a light-hearted read because it's actually quite dense. It's pretty philosophical in tone, frequently introspective, and there's a lot of discussion over things like the purpose of science, the ethics of cloning, and the nature of selfhood, which, as the title of the novel would suggest, self-discovery. This is a rich read. It's thoughtful and it's witty, and I think it deserves to be better known. Let's move on to the final novel that I'd like to talk about, which is Roadside Picnic by Arkady and Boris Strugatsky. The Strugatsky brothers are among Russia's best-known SF authors, and a wide range of their novels are available in English. I would say that Roadside Picnic is probably their most famous novel, at least internationally. It was published in Russian in 1972, and an English translation came out not too long afterwards. But I think it's worth getting hold of this more recent 2012 translation, which I have here, because from what I've heard, the more recent translation is more faithful to the original text, which had been restored after edits made by the Soviet censors in the 70s. So try and get hold of the more recent translation if you can, I think. Anyway, this novel has a fascinating premise. Prior to the events of the story, Earth has received a visitation from an alien race. But the aliens themselves are never actually seen. They just arrived here, they stopped off briefly on our planet and left without any explanation. But they did leave an indelible mark in their wake on our planet in places known as the zones. And these are mysterious and dangerous areas of the globe filled with bizarre phenomena. And there's some really intriguing world building in here. Within these zones are various enigmatic artifacts that were left behind by the aliens, the purpose of which is usually not clear. These things are wondrous, often deadly, and they defy human understanding. And there's a lot of human interest in these things. But of course, the zones are dangerous and highly restricted areas. So a black market develops, and in this novel we follow a stalker whose role it is to find and smuggle these things out of the zone, which is both illegal and highly dangerous, and of course very lucrative. So this is a quick and enjoyable read with rich philosophical depth and haunting and immersive world building. The scenes within the zones, I think, are really fascinating. They are full of palpable tension, and this is also a novel which is pretty rich in its social commentary. It's kind of like a critique on the social ills of greed and exploitation and corruption, which is as much relevant in our 21st century as it was in Cold War Russia. Definitely worth a read. Right, so let's complete this list with an anthology, which is a great way to explore Soviet science fiction in short form and dip your toes into various authors. So this is Red Star Tales, a century of Russian and Soviet science fiction, edited by Yvonne Howell, published in 2015. This is a solid collection, There are 18 short stories in here, including works from a number of the authors that I've already discussed. We've got the Strugatskys, Savchenko, Belyaev. This actually includes the original novelette version of Professor Dowell's Head, which remains an excellent story, whichever version you read. And another memorable story, I think, is there's this story called The Lunar Bomb by Andrei Platonov, which is a kind of playfully absurd and nihilistic tale about a man with a death wish to fly to the moon. But I'm going to have to mention Vladimir Savchenko again here, because he wrote one of the standouts in this collection, which I still think about years after having read it. And this is an enduring and mind-bending story called Mixed Up, which is a story on the theme of synesthesia, in a pretty extreme form of synesthesia, right? So in this story, a man's consciousness is beamed across space as part of a sort of radical new method of interstellar travel, right? So this is the experiment. His consciousness successfully travels across space, comes back to Earth, but after he returns to his earthly body, he finds that his perception of the world has been radically transformed so that his vision and his hearing are inverted. Now he sees sound and hears shapes and colours, right? Which is a little difficult to envision, but the author describes this in such a vivid and profound way, it's kind of mind-boggling. And the thing is, he doesn't want to be treated. He doesn't want to go back to his original perception, because he believes that this kind of neurological mix-up has given him a much deeper comprehension of the universe around him than he had before. It's a little difficult to wrap your head around this concept, but I think it's really fascinating in the way that it's written. It's a unique and thought-provoking story. And this is the story, actually, that got me interested in Savchenko's work, and that's how I sought out self-discovery. Anyway, that's a decent anthology, and that completes the list. Thank you very much for watching, and do let me know if there are any other Soviet sci-fi books out there that you can recommend in English translation. I know that there's a lot of Strugatsky novels out there in the SF Masterworks range. I've got one more here that I haven't read yet. Monday starts on Saturday. I'm definitely interested in giving this a read sometime. Another Soviet novel that I want to give a try is another of Alexander Belyaev's. It's called The Amphibian. It's apparently his best known, or one of his best known works. But I'd be also interested in exploring other authors that I'm not familiar with yet. So yeah, please do give me your recommendations if you have any. That is all for today. See you again soon for some more sci-fi content.